Hey guys, another video from How to Do Upholstery. This is a center console style armrest. I've already cut apart the pieces and put my patterning marks on them. And I had a little foam damage, so I'm going to strip the foam off with my die grinder with the sanding disc, my favorite tool. You could use a wire brush or whatever else you can use to get the foam off. And then I'm just going to use some foam tack spray, general adhesive spray, and actually it's 1/4 inch. What it actually is foam back headliner is what we use for our 1/4 inch foam. We get it in giant rolls. It's what they basically call scrap headliner. It works really good for a 1/4 inch foam, so that's what I'm using here. Cover everything with a good layer of glue, let it tack up. I didn't show you, but I did let it tack up there. Hold the center down and pull the sides up. And I pull the sides up because if I just tried to lay the foam up, it would wrinkle and get lines in it. And then I'm going to get a razor blade. I like to use razor blades. I use a lot of razor blades. Whenever I cut foam, hold it at a nice 45-degree angle. Leaves a nice smooth cut all the way around. You use scissors and you end up with jagged edges. I just like to use razor blades. So get that all trimmed off. I'm going to go ahead and pattern my pieces out. I leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I actually draw my patterns where I want to cut. Some people will draw their patterns and then cut a 1/2 inch outside of the line. It's personal preference. I just prefer to draw my lines where I'm going to cut. And as far as seam allowance, however much you take up when you sew, you might only take up 1/4 of an inch. It's just a 1/2 inch is what I was taught. So I give a 1/2 inch when I'm making my patterns. And so I cut everything out. Now I'm not adding foam to the material. Usually I will, but the foam is perfect on the armrest because I just put new foam on it. So I don't need to add any foam here. And then I talk a lot about uniformity and symmetrics. Here I'm making sure that the two opposite pieces, that there's 4 pieces on this armrest. 2 make up one side, 2 make up the other side. Here I'm just laying the opposites on top of each other and making them exactly the same so that even if I change the piece a little bit, I still want everything to be the same. If everything's uniform on the pattern, it's going to be uniform when you're done, as long as you sew it up right. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm making the other pieces the same. And here I'm gonna sew it up. Not a great view here, but I don't use runoff tabs. Some of the trimmers use or upholsterers will use runoff tabs when they're sewing, and what that means is when they get to the end of their seam, they have these little squares of just junk material that they've cut up, and they'll just stick a tab in there as they sew, and it holds the thread. So then when they start to sew again, they just sew off that tab and right onto their material, whatever they're sewing up. I just hold the strings. You have to hold the strings off to the side. Not You can kind of see me do it with my right hand when I first start to sew. I'll hold the strings over, and that just keeps them from getting goobered up when they first start, because sometimes they will, or the top thread will pull out of the needle if you're not holding it. The other thing is when you're sewing, if you haven't sewed much, the whole purpose of the patterning marks is one thing, is to help you know where everything goes. The other reason is that when you're sewing on any sewing machine, the top piece is going to have a tendency to pull through the machine faster than the bottom piece. And so what you're going to have to do is you kind of push one piece and pull the other piece as you go. And it's hard when you're first starting to learn, but it becomes second nature. You'll check your marks, then you'll pull one a little bit or push the other a little bit or whatever it is you have to do to adjust to make your lines line up. So that the lines aren't just solely to know where the pieces go. They are to help when you're sewing because the machine doesn't pull the pieces both through at exactly the same time, or at the same pace rather. And then here I'm doing a French seam. This particular armrest had a French seam on each seam. When you're doing a French seam, I was taught you just pick a spot on the foot and you just keep the seam lined up on that spot, and that's how you keep your seams even and straight. Your French seams look nice that way. And there's a lot of different ways to do things. That's the thing about upholstery. You have to take all the knowledge and information you can get from wherever you can get it, and then practice it and use it hands-on, and then you end up altering the way that you do things just a little bit to make it your way of doing it, whatever way works the best for you. One thing when you are French seaming, you want to make sure and keep your materials pulled. If you can kind of see, I'm pulling the materials apart at the seam, and what that does is it just keeps the materials nice and tight so that when you're done, you don't have a bubbly French seam. It's nice and flat. Now I'm showing you the back here. I've got into practice that I didn't always do it, but I've got to where, especially with French seams and top seams, I trim the back on everything. And the purpose for that is simply that sometimes when you're finished and you haven't trimmed the back, you can see a line from that extra material on the top. If you trim it, you don't see it. So it's just another small thing that you can do that makes it look a lot better when you're done. And it only takes a minute. So now it's time to install it. Oh, I'm showing you here. I use silicone spray on everything whenever I install anything. Well, most anything. I really didn't need to use it here. The thing with silicone spray, if you've taken many things apart, you will find on bucket seats, on boat seats especially, there's plastic underneath the old covers. Some people think that that was to keep them from getting wet, from the foam getting wet. That's not the purpose. The purpose of the plastic or of the silicone spray when I use it is that once you get the cover on, they're generally pretty tight. That plastic allows you to move it around a little bit because you're always going to have to adjust covers a little bit once they're on. You got to beat them around and pull them down. And if you haven't used silicone spray or plastic, and we carry silicone spray, that's what we use. We don't use plastic for whatever reason. We use silicone spray, and it works great too. It just allows you to be able to move the cover around and adjust it to get it into its proper place and make it fit properly easier. Now, when it comes to installing something, whether it's an armrest cover, a restaurant booth cover, any cover that you staple on, um, I personally will set the back. I'll make sure it's centered. I will set the front and the back. Make sure my seams are all lined up right. Set the corners, and then set the rest of the cover. And once you have the front and the back and the seams lined up right and the corners set, all you really have to do is just flip it over once in a while to make sure that your seams are still straight when you're pulling the material around to staple it, that you're not pulling it too tight or not tight enough. And then I'm using a little bit of steam here. I may not have needed to, but steam comes in handy. I love to use steam. It softens the material up, makes it a lot more pliable, helps you get wrinkles out. Now, if you don't have access to steam, which a lot of you probably do not, because steamers are very expensive, and most of your at-home do-it-yourself kind of people, you're not going to have steam. You can set the vinyl in the sun once you have your covers. A lot of times I'll do that anyway. I'll toss them out in the sun for an hour or half an hour or whatever if it's a nice warm day, and you won't believe how much that will help when it comes to getting that material pliable. Because cold vinyl is not pliable. Warm vinyl is very pliable. And different grades of vinyl and different kinds of vinyl have different amounts of pliability, if you will. So the warmer you can get the material, the easier it is to work with, the easier it is to install and make look better. You can set it in the sun. You can use steam. I have a heat gun that I use. I think I'll use it for a second here in a minute. I was just using it just to show you. And then I edited most of it out, but I do use it for a second. The heat gun works real well. With the heat gun, you can't do everything that you can with a steamer, but you can do quite a bit. Um, and with the heat gun, you just have to remember to keep moving the heat gun around. You can also use a blow dryer. You can use a blow dryer for a heat gun. It won't get hot as fast, but it will work. It will get the material warm. And then you can also use for a foam knife. We have like a $1,200 foam knife, a Bosch foam knife that we use. An electric turkey carving knife works wonderful to cut foam with. I know shops that still use an electric turkey carving knife. They work great. They're like $8 and they cut foam real slick. Um, yeah, so I mean, if you can't afford the good upholstery tools, you can pick up the the other things, the turkey carving knife or the heat gun will work. They're great. They're great for the job. So that's what finished new armrest. It's a simple thing. I'm just trying to show you guys how these things are done. Nice straight lines, nice and tight. All you gotta do is put it back on. All right, thanks you guys. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching.